Well, joining us now to discuss workplace vaccination mandates is Levitt Sheikh. She is an employment lawyer and partner at Levitt Sheikh and joins us from Montreal. Levitt, thank you for being with us today.
Happy to be on.
So, here we have employees who have not met workplace vaccination deadlines now facing the potential of either being told to stay at home or really the potential of also being laid off. In fact, you heard there from Laura that the hospitals in Windsor have now laid off 81 staff members for this very reason. Can hospitals, healthcare authorities really do this?
Yes, they can. There's been ample warning, and we are dealing with a public health urgency. And so from a public policy perspective, there's a lot of pressure on adjudicators who may potentially end up being the decision makers in some of these cases that will get tried at litigation as to whether or not this was the right response. So I think that, unpaid leave of absence or being sent home, whatever the hospitals want to call it, is almost like a buffer of sorts to give their employees, a short window to see the light and to hold on to their job. So a little short window of job security where you can, either do whatever you need to do to convince yourself that, being vaccinated and abiding by a reasonable workplace policy is the right thing to do. And if you don't, or if you confirm early on that you simply refuse to be vaccinated, then you're going to be fired.
Can an employee, and I think you alluded to this in terms of legal challenges, but can an employee essentially say that vaccine mandates are infringing against their personal rights and freedoms?
Well, that's exactly what employees are saying. So when looking at the relatively small population that is not vaccinated at all, so not those that are at least have the one dose, that's precisely what they're saying, that this is our right from even a charter perspective to, live our life in a manner that we see fit as long as we're not causing harm to anyone. And that's the problem. The question is, are you causing harm to anyone if you refuse to be vaccinated? And particularly when you're working within a company or an organization that is taking steps to ensure from a public-facing perspective that employees are safe in the workplace. So all employers have a legal obligation to keep their employees safe, which is why it is trumping your personal and private rights.
And presumably this also extends to private companies, because right now we're using a hospital example, but also private companies are looking at vaccine mandates and enforcing them as well.
A ton of my clients. So I represent employers both in the public and private sector. And whereas, in the public sector, we are hearing a lot more from the mothership, so to speak, whether it's at the municipal, provincial, or federal level. And when looking at the private sector, they are also following suit and doing what they can to make themselves, from an operational standpoint, more attractive to their consumers, clients, or patrons, whichever term you want to use, but also to keep their employees safe in the workplace, because there is occupational health and safety legislation that clearly says all employers have an obligation to ensure that everyone is safe.
Now, we've heard of possible exemptions. What exemptions would be acceptable?
So, in my view, it is the medical exemptions that seem to be the easiest, and I want to qualify that when I say that. By easiest, I simply mean going to see your treating physician or your healthcare practitioner who can put in place, medical documentation in place for you that clearly stipulates why exactly you can't be vaccinated. So while generally employers are never entitled to a diagnosis and only a prognosis when it comes to your medical issue, where it relates to a vaccination, I do suspect that that bar is going to be lowered a little bit, and employers are going to be entitled to more information. Now, I've had some employee clients say to me, well, I'm very anxious about being vaccinated, and my doctor has written me a note that says, patient too anxious to be vaccinated. That does not qualify as an appropriate medical exemption.
And what about religious exemptions?
Religious exemptions in our province in Ontario, which is where I live, not where I'm visiting right now, as it stands, would still qualify with some detail as to what the religious infringement would possibly be with the vaccination. Here I sit in Quebec today, however, and the story here is very different. And this is a province where, historically, it has been criticized for not holding space for religious values. And so it isn't surprising to me that Quebec is now saying that, look, this is a public health urgency issue and we're not going to consider religion at all. Are there going to be human rights complaints filed? Is there going to be contentious litigation in this area in Quebec? It would not surprise me if there is, but it also doesn't surprise me that Quebec has taken this position.
So let's pick up then one last point here, because as you say, the companies do have, these entities have the right to create these mandates, to enforce these mandates based on public health. So what about employees who decide to still not get vaccinated? Are they entitled to any type of compensation whatsoever?
Depends on the position that the employer takes. So if you don't want to if you're a public sector employee and you don't want to demoralize your staff, then those who choose not to be vaccinated, and quite frankly, if you have the financial bandwidth to afford to do so, you may say, okay, you don't want to be vaccinated, we're going to walk you to the door, and here's a severance package, based on your collective agreement if you're unionized, and, based on your length of service and age if you're not unionized. But it wouldn't surprise me if the private sector was a little bit more aggressive and said, absolutely not. This is a workplace policy like any other workplace policy, and if you're going to violate it, we're going to walk you to the door, and we're not going to pay you a penny of severance. And I think there is a reasonable argument on behalf of the employer to be made there.
Okay, Levitt Sheikh, thank you for that. Appreciate it. And Levitt is an employment lawyer, also partner at Levitt Sheikh.